everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Raincatcher podcast, Business Brokerage Done Differently. We have an incredible guest today. I'm so excited to introduce her. Welcome, Denise
Oh, I'm so
Logan.
glad to be with you, Marla.
Yes, this is wonderful. I'll tell you, we've got a lot of great stuff that we're going to be talking about today, but I want to introduce you to Denise. So, Denise focuses on helping business owners who are ready to sell, but helping them in a way that they understand that it's not just a transaction, which is the language that we speak in our world in Raincatcher. Denise has a background as a lawyer, mental health professional, business owner, combined with 2 decades of research and thought leadership in the subjects of work, money, and the meaning, that it has working with business owners. She's a speaker. And Denise, I could just go on and on. You wrote a book. You're the author of The Seller's Journey, a business fable about navigating the emotional obstacles to selling your business. Why don't we start there? Can you just talk a little bit about how you got started and what your journey working
Oh,
with
I'd love
business
that.
owners?
That's so fun. So, and many of your listeners will have the same experience. Where you end up is not always where you started. But if we are thoughtful about it, we have a through line that kind of runs through our life. So that's what I'll suggest is listen for the through line as I tell the journey that I was on. In my early life, I was a mental health professional. And then later I became a lawyer. Now, some of the listeners are thinking, why didn't you use that really good mental health skill to keep yourself from becoming a lawyer, for heaven's sake? And then I built my own practice in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And when we reached a really good size, I realized I would rather put a stick in my eye than go to work one more day. And I did a super ugly, choppy exit from my own business, merged my firm with a larger firm, got rid of my house and bought a motor home, and I ran off. Now that could be a whole separate conversation with a beverage where we talk about the adventure of that. For me, I thought it would be 6 months to clear my head and figure out what came next. And it turned into several years where I traveled all over North and Central America in a 38-foot motorhome with a car I towed behind and two little dogs.
By yourself.
By myself. That there is so much fun around that. We'll have a separate fun
Oh
conversation
my
about
gosh, we will
that.
have to do that. Yes.
And when I came off the road, I joined a friend's business who was preparing it for sale. Over the next 10 years, we took that business to the market 3 times and he could not let go.
Oh,
And I thought, isn't this interesting? You could be me and wait too long and be ready to give it away. Or you could be him and go too early and not be able to pull the trigger.
mhm,
So I left and did a research study about what is going on. Why do business owners get stuck?
mhm.
And how could we help them navigate the emotional part of what happens? So then I worked one on one with business owners and their advisors to help them navigate all of these emotional obstacles. I wrote The Seller's Journey and I've spoken at more than 500 events over the last 12 years.
Wow. That is an incredible start to your career and incredible that you were able to take those the experiences you had and help small business owners. And you've been in the trenches, like you understand, you've been in their shoes.
The things that I saw, and this is where the thread kind of pulls through all of those different experiences. In my early life as a mental health professional, I had two different tracks that I was on. So one was work and financial disorders. So people who are addicted to work and money
Mm,
instead of connected through other ways to people.
yeah.
The other thread that I was following was thanatology, which is the study of death and dying.
Oh,
And at the time, those things didn't look like they went together. I remember my academic advisor saying, you have to pick one. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Sorry, I have a little squirrel thing. So But those two things, here I am, decades later, and I realized that those two things actually weave together in an important way for our business owners as they're beginning to think about exiting.
Yes.
Because so many times what we talk to them about, or what any advisor talks to them about, is the economics of it. We talk about the money.
Mhm.
And no one talks to them, or few people talk to them about the transition.
Yes.
And for our business owners, this is the single largest transition in their adult professional life.
Yeah.
And when all we do is focus on the economics, what happens is we set them up to not be able to talk about the emotional parts of what is happening for them. And
Mhm.
so I see it quite clearly for a lot of owners too. They're at a later stage. Here's something I'll always say, Marla. We will all leave our businesses
Yes.
voluntarily or involuntarily.
Yes.
It is not if I leave my business. The answer is when we leave our business. And for some owners, they can feel like that presents a black hole.
Mhm.
What will happen to me when I leave my business? It can also be touching off mortality issues, issues in relationship. And so a skillful advisor is prepared to walk that with an owner.
Yes. So Denise, I don't know if you know this. I've shared this with my audience in the past, but when I sold, so first off, we have a similar background because I went to school originally to become a social worker.
Look at that.
And then I became an accountant. So there's that. But I'm thinking when you're talking, one of the things that led me to Raincatcher was when I sold my CFO business. So I've been in mergers and acquisitions, saw there was a need for CFO services, went in, created that, sold that in 2016 to a national group. That was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And I mean that. And anyone
Mhm.
that's considering, this, that's what you're talking about. I had been through I mean, I don't know how many it was, 25, 50 transactions at that point, but never my own. And I could not believe the emotions that I felt going through that. It was hard. It was hard hearing them talk about how they were going to make changes to my services and my customers and my employees. And I'm like, you can't do that, but they could because it was theirs. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how
Mm.
do you navigate that with a business owner? What would you have said to me if you had been my advisor back then?
Yeah. So I want to say one thing before I jump into that,
Okay.
Marla, which is it is one of the most important reasons to choose an advisor who has already processed their own exit. So one of the questions I suggest that an owner asks an advisor is, what is your plan to leave your business? And an advisor who doesn't have an answer to that question, I would wonder, why am I going to ask you to walk this path with me if you don't know how you're going to leave?
Great point.
Because an advisor who is prepared and has done this emotional work for themselves and has a plan, and not just a financial plan, but really has dealt with the things that you and I are going to talk about throughout this podcast, will be so much more prepared to slow down the process with an owner and help them make the right choices. There's a meme in our industry, which is time kills all deals.
Yes.
And I will tell you, I think that's a flat out lie. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Time is not what kills deals. What kills deals is unprocessed emotion.
Mm,
Because if we can slow things down enough to allow the parties to catch up, then the process will continue. But what often happens is someone in the transaction gets scared. And it might be someone who thinks, if I don't get this deal done, I'm not going to get paid, or my buyer might walk, or any of the fear based things that drive that. And then that makes someone say, time will kill this deal. I'm like, no. So I'm going to use a metaphor for it. Do you know the children's game, Shoots and Ladders?
yes.
So I grew up in Canada, and there it was called Snakes and Ladders. And I don't know who the heck thought naming a children's game with snakes in it felt like that was a really good idea. So I kind of like the American version of Shoots and Ladders. So if you think about how that game goes, and think about that in the context of the sale of a business, right? You're trucking along the board, and all of a sudden you get to a ladder, and you go up the board, and you're like, woohoo, I'm winning. And then 2 rolls later, all of a sudden you hit a chute. Zoom, you're down the board again. Ah, that feels so discouraging.
Mhm.
As advisors, we know that. And we even joke about it in kind of a macabre way where we say every deal dies 7 deaths.
Yeah.
But for our clients, for the business owner, they have not been through this before. And so when they hit a chute and something happens in the transaction and they are pulled down,
Mhm.
instead of shoving them along and saying, just keep going, that is the moment for the advisors for this owner to step in and say, I got you. I know that's discouraging. And here's what's happening. And not say, don't worry, it's going to be good. Because we know as human beings, whenever we have a disappointment, we know intuitively how to do this with our children, with our family, with our close friends. We know
Yeah.
how to attend and care for them. And an advisor who brings that same level of care to the process
Mhm.
can help an owner resettle and then take the next step. So they stay in the game and they don't do what we do as children when we get frustrated, which is flip the board and say, I'm going home.
Yeah.
And that, in many ways, is what happens in a transaction because we haven't done the work as advisors to help care for and prepare an owner for the emotional part of this as well as the transactional part.
Oh my goodness, Denise, you are just speaking my language because I can't even endorse what you just said enough. That is the differentiator in Raincatcher. That is what we're proud to stand behind is that we will not push an owner into making a decision without knowing all the facts, understanding the process, and also talking about that emotional side of transitioning your business. One of the things I think that I see, tell me if you agree in my space, so in business brokerage and mergers acquisitions, oftentimes the advisors will focus so much around the valuation of the business, which is very, very important, but they forget to talk about the other considerations of selling the business. They forget to talk to them about what type of buyer that business owner wants to continue the legacy of their business. And
Right.
I don't know if you did you see the survey that the Exit Planning Institute did, like, gosh, 4 years ago now, 3 years ago? They said that 75% of business owners regretted selling their business, but it was only 5% had to do with purchase price.
Right. And that is a tragedy. That is a flat out tragedy. Seller's remorse is a real thing,
Mhm,
and it doesn't have to be that way. So, right, all money is not equal.
mhm,
Highest price doesn't make best purchaser.
mhm.
And each owner is wired to care about different things. So there's in choosing who they should sell to, and there is also in what life is like for them when they leave. Do you want to stay on? Right? Sometimes with a private equity purchaser, for example, the private equity firm will say, you get 2 bites at the apple. You take some money off the table now and you keep the business, you get to keep running the business and you get to sell again later. And that's a great option
For
for
some.
some owners. But for some owners, here's a question that I'll ask. How much do you like driving the car and having your spouse tell you how to drive the car? and where to turn. Are you the person who's cool with that and you can settle in and be like, oh, it's good to get helpful direction? Or are you the person who, like, you know what you do?
Wow, I love that. This is a topic that I wish more of us, talked about regularly. It's one of the things that we're trying to do in Raincatcher. We talk about, raising the bar, being change agents in our industry. None of my brokers are rewarded for pushing someone into an agency agreement. We do a lot on the front end of talking to that business owner about everything you just said. What are you going to do when you sell your business? The example you just gave, I'm going to borrow that because I love that. Yeah.
I
So,
love that. Here's a
yes,
question
yeah,
that
yeah,
I often ask owners, and you are welcome. Right, listeners, get your paper because this is one you're going to want to work through and listen to the podcast again. Here's the question: what does work provide for you other than money and financial security? So
wow,
I'll say it again. What does work provide for you other than money and financial security? Let's take those off the table for now because assuming you're selling your business, money and financial security is one of the pieces. Now, let's list, we should be able to get 10, 12, 15 distinct answers to that question. And some of you are like, well, how am I going to get all those answers? Because here's what comes up. So, Marla, let's just play a little game with this. What does work provide for you other than money and financial security?
yeah, it gives me purpose. I feel for me, it's very purpose driven. I feel fulfilled because I'm helping the small business community. And my DNA is wired that I have to help others. I have to make a difference in some way.
Yeah. And we think about some of the things that listeners might have popping up for them. Structure, right? It provides an order to our day and our week, a place to go. Gee, during the pandemic, weren't we all like, I have to get out of this house? And P.S., your spouse was thinking that too. You're right. You have to get out of this house,
I think we've just now settled down on separations and divorce rates, which was really very unfortunate. Yes.
right? A place to go,
Yeah.
intellectual stimulation, friendship. For a lot of our owners, their employees and customers and vendors and peers are their friends. But then we start to get into some of the things that we don't often like to talk about. The thrill of the chase, right? Power. At
Yes.
work, you say you want something done and it pretty much gets done.
Yeah.
How's that work at home? Maybe not quite the same where you want something done and your kids or your spouse are like, yeah, maybe not. We start looking at all of the many things, and it's why I have a list of at least 10 that an owner should be writing down. And then we look at those needs don't go away just because you get a big sack of cash.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, once you identify what those needs are, how will I get those needs met outside of work?
Mm, hmm.
Because
That's
that creates a compelling future to move toward. And I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, when I sell the business, I'll figure this out. I'm like, no, right now. In fact, maybe even when you start your business, right?
yeah.
We use Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind theory. When you leave your business, how will all of these needs get met? So I was working with an owner not long ago who said, one of the things he gets is that his wisdom is so valued,
Mm,
right? People come to him and ask him the questions, and they value that. And he will need to get that met somewhere else. Maybe his spouse won't really value that, and certainly not in the same way.
yeah.
And I think those are important pieces where we start looking at why do you want to sell, which is one piece. There is what are you getting from work?
Mhm.
What will be the right acquirer of your business? What are the roles that you intend to play if you're staying on in the business? Because
Mhm.
let's say the wisdom keeper
Mhm.
is the role that someone wants. Is that in alignment with what the purchaser wants for you to play that role?
Yes.
If you've been in, let's say you've been the sales leader for your business, right? I totally get it. When it was time for me to leave my business, part of it was I was burned out and there were plenty of things that I was doing that I no longer enjoyed doing. And honestly, I didn't have someone to help me in this process at the time, which is why I do this work now.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out how to get back to the things that I loved and
Mhm.
stepping away from the things I didn't love. And so I think there's so many pieces to preparing to exit a business, in addition to the transactional, the financial, making sure your business is stable and can operate without you.
Yeah. What was your moment? When did you realize that you
Uh,
needed that it was time to exit your business? What was the process you went through?
oh, that's such a good story. And there's and you're everyone who's listening, and this from your own story too, Marla. There's the moment, and then there's all of the moments that led up to the moment,
Yes.
right? There's
Yeah.
the straw that broke the camel's back. So I'll tell you
Yes.
one of the leading up to it moments. I had
Okay.
been on a trade group. I was on a board of directors of an industry trade group for years, and they brought in a team facilitator. Oh, isn't everyone rolling their eyes right now? Like a team building exercise. Oh, yay. So they put us in a ballroom, like probably a Holiday Inn or a Marriott, on a Tuesday night in Alexandria, Virginia, which is where I was. And the facilitator says, I want all of you to stand in a circle and you're going to introduce yourself to each other, but you cannot use a traditional moniker. So you can't say, Hi, I'm Denise. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a lawyer. You have to use something else. And
Okay.
honestly, I was standing in that room thinking, well, like what else? What else is there to say other than that? And so, and I'd been on this group for a long time, so I knew these people, but I knew them in their professional context only.
Mm.
So here comes a woman who says, I play harp at the bedside of dying patients in hospice. And I
Oh,
was like, well, that's something.
yeah.
Okay. And then the person next to her says something. And then a man says, well, I've been restoring this antique car in a storage locker and for my son for his upcoming 16th birthday, and it's a surprise. And when I come home at night, I'm so worried that my wife sees grease under my nails because I don't want her to ruin the surprise. And I'm like, well, that's something. And I
Yeah.
started to get a little nervous that, oh no, it's moving around the circle. It's getting closer to me.
Yeah.
And so I decided I was going to excuse myself to use the ladies' room and regroup a little. So I take my purse and I go out into the hallway and I realize to the right is the ladies' room and to the left is the parking lot. And I bailed.
You did it. Did you really? Oh my
I
goodness.
totally bailed on this facilitated event. And I got in my car and I started to cry. And I cried the whole way home in the pouring rain because I realized my life had gotten so small
Mm.
that my business had taken over my whole life.
Mm.
And then I started taking figure skating lessons, which I do not really recommend. And then, like, there were a whole bunch of things where I realized, oh no, I have to start expanding my life.
Mm.
And that was a beginning. I think closer to when I actually exited, I was so burned out.
Mm.
And everyone who I talked to about being burned out, I was in my middle 30s at the time. I'd built a very large firm. It was a hungry machine with a lot of mouths to feed.
Mm.
And I needed a significant break. And what often happened, right? I had a consultant who came in and he was like, oh, these are the things we need to do. And in 5 years or 12 years, whatever his number was, all I remember is five, then, you'll be positioned to exit. I did not have 5 years left inside of me to
I get
keep
that.
doing that. I didn't. And anytime I talk to people about the sense of intense burnout that I was feeling, they were like, go on vacation, buy a vacation house, like get a boat, all the things that we tell people that are not actually effective.
Yeah.
And so I made a super ugly exit from my business because I did not have a plan and I realized I can't stay.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting piece that owners often will say, I'll just know when it's time to exit. And I usually say, you will, but you don't want it to be like I did.
Right.
And so we should always be preparing from the beginning.
Yeah.
How am I preparing this business so that I can leave?
Yes.
And not just because you might get burned out, but all of the statistics show that people have an idea of when they're going to retire. And there's some interesting psychology behind why I call it the oh my syndrome, one more year. Oh my, one more
Oh
year.
my.
But
Yes.
if you ask an owner, any business owner, when will you retire? The likelihood is that you will hear 3 to 5 years is almost always what you hear, 3 to 5 years. And part of that is because 3 years feels close enough that it's not right breathing down my neck. And 5 years, no one is going to get on my back because I pushed it out too far. But when I listen to business owners, often that is a rolling 3 to 5 years, and they never get there. So when I hear that, what I know is that there is something else happening that they are not able to prepare for. And that's usually an emotional piece that's under there. And statistically, what we see is that people have an idea in their mind when they're going to retire. But almost always, owners end up leaving their businesses 2 to 5 years earlier than that time that they imagine. And it's for all of the reasons that we all know. For heaven's sake, we just come through a pandemic,
Yes.
right? It might be your health or the health of your spouse or a turn in the industry
Or the 40s.
or, right,
One of the
or,
40s. Yeah.
right, or an unexpected death. I spoke at a really interesting conference earlier this year. It was a life insurance conference. And so it was all top producing agents. And one of the exercises that I had them do, which, I have a whole bunch of fun when I'm speaking because I want people to engage in this material. So I had them each write down the date on which they will die. So I started with this. I'm like, what's your number? Oh, no, not the number that you need to retire in your bank account. What is the date on which you will die? Now, I wish your listeners could see your face right now because their face looks exactly like yours. What? Who is this woman, Denise Logan? Why is she asking me to write down? Notice the superstition, the fear, all of that that is coming up for us when we even think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to write that date down.
Yeah. It's kind of scary.
That is the thanatology, the mortality piece that I work with. Because guess what? We will each die
Yes.
at some point. So at this conference, right, I had all of these folks write the number down, and some of them were even unwilling to write down the number.
Ah.
And then I had them say it out loud. And I will tell you, every single person in that room is going to live to be 95 years old. I was like, seriously, don't you guys use like
So there was no action.
actuarial? You're right. Don't you use actuarial charts? And P.S. By the way, I saw some of you last night at the bar. No, and I see your bellies. You're not actually going to live to be the outlier who's 95.
Right.
This is not to force people into mortality, but what comes up is what are those things that are keeping you from facing this reality? Because often what I see is a business owner will then double down into, I need more money. And that flips into when we are afraid, we turn to something that feels certain.
Mhm.
And we're used to talking about money and thinking money will make us safe.
Mhm.
And money isn't what keeps us safe.
That's
It
right.
is relational security.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when an advisor, whether it's a financial advisor or an M&A advisor or a business broker or a lawyer or a CPA or anyone who is advising a business owner, talks to them only about the money, we do a huge disservice to them.
Yeah.
Because you could be me and realize I was too burned out. I couldn't keep doing it.
Yeah.
If everyone was only talking to me about the economics and not about, right, we have this idea about what success looks like.
Mhm.
Can I tell you another ridiculous story?
Oh, please. Oh my gosh, your stories are fantastic.
And we'll talk about some stories about business owners. I don't need to use myself as the
No,
example
this is
always, but
wonderful. This is good.
years after I exited my business, I was speaking at a women's conference on an island, no less. So several hundred women business owners, and I'm teaching a multi-day workshop. And at some point in the first day, I decide I'm going to, I don't know why. Even looking back, I'm like, I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I decided to like tell my fully unvarnished version of my story and how I left. And then I thought, oh, that's the first time I've really said all of that publicly. I think I'm going to go to the ladies' room and splash some water on my face. I did not leave my own conference. Okay, so let's start there. I did not bail and like get on the
Didn't
ferry and run
swim to
away.
the next
Yeah, don't
island.
get
Got it.
scared, everyone. So I come back on stage and I said, I've never told this fully unvarnished story of like it was an ugly exit for me. How did that land for you? And a woman in the back of the room stands up, puts her hand on her hip, and says, well, here I thought you were a successful business owner. And now I find like, truly, weren't you a failure to have like not stayed and grown it and blah, 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 blah. She unloaded on me, right?
Oh,
Again, I wish the video was here because your face looked like
oh,
my
my,
face.
oh my gosh, my heart is just aching. What did you
Right? I was
do?
sweating through my blouse. My mouth was wide open. And this woman just dressed me down from the audience. And when she finished, I said, wow, thank you. You said every single thing I have ever been worried that someone would say to me, and a few I hadn't yet thought of.
That's a
And
nice way to
I
say it.
and I notice I'm still standing.
Ah,
And my question for you, and maybe the question for your listeners today is, what is it that you are unwilling to do because you are afraid someone will say to you the version of what that woman said to me?
mm,
That unless you do ABC, you are considered a failure.
mm.
So she turned on, this story gets even a little crazier. Just hang in here. So she turns on her heel and storms out of the room.
Oh my.
And one third of the audience got up and walked out. It's like,
No,
oh no. And remember, I'm on an island
you're
with
stuck
these
with
women.
it.
And I was a little panicky. I was like, oh, this is going strangely, isn't it? And then I realized, wait a minute, two-thirds of my audience is here. I never went back to the outline of what I had planned for them for that weekend event. Instead, we really dropped in very deeply into the things that we're talking about today.
Mm,
Those things that business owners don't get an opportunity to talk about with someone else because there's this myth
yeah,
that we all have to be perfect and know how to do what we're doing, and we have to stick it out no matter what, no matter the cost. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that anyone should hurry up and abandon their business,
no.
but I think there is, and we see it with multi-generational businesses too, that there's this myth that only if your business passes to your children and your grandchildren have you had a successful business. Is that truly the
Mhm.
only marker?
Right.
Are you as a business owner being sustained and nourished? by the work you're doing. When I look back on my business, truly the time I was probably happiest was when it was one legal secretary and a paralegal and maybe an associate, and we were in like 600 square feet of office
Yeah.
space.
I think
Not
that's super fun
several,
that way.
right, not several floors of a building. And we hear a ton about scaling and that you must always scale and bigger and blah, blah, blah. That might be true
For
for
some,
some, and it is not true for all. And I
that's right.
think coming into awareness of who are you, what is the business that nourishes you, that feeds, remember all of those things that we said you're getting from your business?
Yes.
Are you getting those? Or are you not getting those anymore?
Mm,
And I think those are some of the ways that we can decide when is the time to sell.
mm,
Because it's not just when I've gotten myself completely burned out, or when I've reached an economic goal, or when I'm forced to sell because of the market, or because there's a big old inbound offer.
yeah.
There are a million times when it's right to sell, and right to sell for you is important.
Yes. And Denise, let's stay there for a minute because I can tell you, since we talk to hundreds of business owners
Mhm.
literally a week, one of the questions that we're getting right now, and it's been through the pandemic, but even more so right now, is when should I sell? Because I'm looking at, we just came out of a pandemic. I barely survived that, or I don't know if I want to go through another one. And so there's fear, what if that happens again? And then we can't ignore what's going on in our country and the economy and our world, right? And so possible recession looks pretty probable. We're already seeing issues with the market now. What do you say to that business owner? Like if a business owner comes to you, you're sitting in my shoes. You know, I'm answering the phone they're wanting to talk about selling the business. And they say, when should I sell? What's your answer?
Yeah, it's not like there is a single answer to that question. I
Yeah,
think what I can say is selling because you're afraid is probably not the best approach.
yeah.
And setting some earlier goals about when will be the right time for me to sell, right,
Mhm,
is a
mhm.
useful tool. And that's why, even at the beginning, one of the things I like to do with owners, and your team probably does a lot of this too, is tell me about the first day in your business, the day
Mhm.
you first put the key in the door, right? Every person listening remembers that day,
Yes.
the very first moment that your website went live, that your sign went up on the building, or maybe you had a building built. I saw something recently on LinkedIn where someone had a photograph of like the walls going up of their new manufacturing facility. And for me, I was like, oh, what is it like if we tap into that deep emotional satisfaction and that hopefulness? What were you hoping for? And have you met that?
Hmm,
And if you haven't met that, why?
hmm.
Is there something left for you to do still? Or are you leaving for another reason? Can I talk about deception a
Oh,
little
yeah,
bit? Can we
yes.
talk about that?
Let's dig
Oh
in.
my gosh, I have to tell you, I do not engage in online drama,
Yeah.
but sometimes I see things online that make me type a rant and then I move it over into my I should write a post on this folder.
Good for
In
you. Good
Instead
personal
of
boundaries.
ranting on someone else's thing. But here's what happened. Someone had written about why it's never okay to tell your employees when you are selling, why you have to keep that a secret.
Mhm.
And I have heard a ton of this in my years in the industry. And that's a huge fear driven element,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's a fascinating thought. So first thing that came for me, right, and there was some dialogue in this post that I thought was super interesting to watch and notice my own reactivity to it as well. But there was a whole, well, if I tell if it was an advisor who was writing, if you tell your employees, then they might leave and then you won't have a business, blah, blah, blah. And my first thought is, are our employees commodities? Are they chattel that we're simply selling off to someone else? Are they important elements of a business? Absolutely.
Yes.
It also touches the whole self-made entrepreneur piece, like, I made this myself. Well, I don't know that anyone makes anything by themselves. Even the plants that are growing in my garden right now, yes, I put the seed in the ground and I pour the water on it, but
Yeah.
I didn't run the pipes that make the water come to my
Yeah.
house.
There's nutrients that are helping to
Right, and
grow.
there are bees that come and pollinate.
Yes.
So I'm not suggesting that every business owner needs to share everything with every employee or that all of your money needs to be split evenly among your employees. But what happens when we touch into the humanity that is surrounding us and our businesses and step away from scarcity and fear and the things that can otherwise drive really bad business and transactional practices? And instead of feeling like I can't let my employees know because they might all bail. Well, I have a question for you. Like, number one, do you think your employees don't know what's going on?
Right.
Because just anyone who's ever had kids, you might think your kids don't know what's going on. Your
Oh,
kids know
yeah, they're fighting,
everything
but
that's
they
going
know.
on. They know. And as a business owner, if you think your employees or customers don't know, well, you're
Yeah.
nuts because they know.
Yeah.
And they might not know exactly what's happening, but now you're going to show your business at 11 o'clock at night by flashlight to a buyer because you don't want anyone to know you're selling. And then for whatever reason, one of your employees happens to be driving by and sees a flashlight going on in your business. And the next day says, "Hey, I thought I saw, were you at the business last night? Are you selling?" And then you lie.
Yeah.
Then you do this lie. Well, no, or you say some other jacked up thing that I heard a wealth manager say on an event recently, which is, you should say, well, businesses are always for sale. I would never turn down the right offer. So how about if we're just not liars? I
Yeah.
know I'm such a weirdo about that, but how about if you don't have to be blabbing everything, but
Mm.
what about if you invest early on in your business in trust with your employees and your partners and your
Mhm.
customers and your community
Mhm.
in ways that you don't have to become a liar? And here's a reason why I don't think it's useful to be a liar anyway. And I know I'm super contrarian in this because people who are listening will be like, that's not the way it goes, Denise. I'm like, you know what? I'm 58 years old. I actually know the way things go by now.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
here's what happens when you have a secret. Let's
Mhm.
talk about the psychology of a
Mhm.
secret.
Mhm.
Inside our brain is a part called the amygdala.
Mhm.
And for those of you who want to go look that word up, it's Amygdala, amygdala. It's the fear sensor in our brain. It's a super helpful part of our brain, but it's also a little dumb because it can't distinguish between real danger and perceived danger.
Mhm.
When you are holding a secret, you are constantly hitting your own amygdala with fear.
Mhm.
Because think about this. Have you ever planned a surprise birthday party for someone?
Sure.
And then you're with that person and they say something and you're like, oh no, do they know? Wait,
Yeah.
do they know? I think they might know.
Yeah.
Your own fear is whipping up in your head, which, by the way, excuse me, which, let's have a drink.
Take a drink.
So your amygdala is tripping all of this fear for you, which
Mhm.
makes you act weird.
Mhm.
Even though you think you're not acting weird, your
Right.
body is sending off signals, which the other person's amygdala is picking up,
Yeah.
which escalates their fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in our country right now is a huge level of uncertainty and fear. And, selling a business generates its own level of uncertainty and trips for the amygdala.
Yes.
And when the amygdala is activated, our prefrontal cortex that's the thinking part of our brain, doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so, what we want to do is be able to as many times as we can throughout the process, be creating trust, be creating. And if I were a buyer and I realized that my seller was concealing information from their employees, from their customers, from whatever, it would be tripping my amygdala as the buyer as well. Huh. If you're willing to lie to the people who are closest to you, who have helped you build this, upon who you depend, are you lying to me
Mm.
too?
I never looked at it through that lens.
It's a really interesting piece where I and I just want to come back to, I'm not suggesting that you go hang a big old sign on the front of your business.
And quite frankly, certain companies you just can't,
Mhm.
certain companies, there's competitors just already poaching employees and customers right and left. But please continue because I agree with you.
But here's the truth. Your employees, if they are crucial to the business, then what you want to do is engage them in a way that they will stay. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, what you're selling is a business. And for many owners, you're going to have an earnout period. You're not just going to get all the cash up front and walk away. And so, if you're really at risk that if your employees knew that you were leaving or your customers knew you were leaving, they would all bolt, then perhaps this isn't actually the right time for you to be selling your business.
I could not agree with you more, Denise. I right there. That's the point.
Perhaps what you need to be doing is creating more solidity in the
Yes.
relationships and in your own internal framework. I do not think that acting from a place of fear in our lives is a helpful place to make decisions from.
Yes. Yes.
So I know we had the question you asked was what would happen if an owner said, when is the right time to sell your business? And I've kind of wandered a little bit here. But if you are selling and you're in the place where I can't let anyone know and
Yeah.
la, 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 all of that, maybe you have some other work to do
Yes.
around this. And is that really true that if your employees knew they would leave? I don't know if that's true. I think that is some of the mythology that has happened in our industry, right? There's some interesting myths. The time
Sure.
kills all deals myth.
Yes.
The if your employees knew they would leave. I was working with a late stage dentist. So funny. He was like, "Oh, I don't want anyone to know." I was like, "You're 76 years old. Do you actually think your staff hasn't been thinking for years, I wonder when he's going to retire? Do you
Right.
think your patients don't look at you
Yeah.
and realize, oh, he's probably going to leave at some point. I wonder what his plan is for me." It's actually so much more helpful when we're able to prepare our
Yeah.
employees, our customers, our vendors, all of the people who help to make our businesses, if we're able to be transparent and
Mhm.
say, you don't have to say, I'm selling this year, but to be able to let them know, I have a
Yeah.
plan. I'm not
Uh-huh.
going to be here forever, and I care enough about you to make sure that you are cared for
Yeah.
along with my exit.
We're
I'm
gonna
not going to sell to right, I'm not gonna sell to a horror
Mhm.
where you're gonna feel traumatized and want to leave your business.
That's right.
I'm not going to sell just to cash out and leave you hanging. A lot of our owners still live in the community after
Mhm.
they leave.
Mhm.
you don't want to be the person. And in this post, and then I'll stop whining about it. But I think it's so instructive because, what this person wrote was, your employees will forgive you for having lied to them.
Oh.
I was so sad. I was like, why is that? I have a whole thing. Do we have to do business this way?
Mm.
Just because other people run their lives and do their business like that, we
Right.
are better than that. And
Yes.
choosing advisors who care about you enough to call bullshit on
Yes.
something like that and
Yes.
to say, hey, don't get scared. You
Yeah.
don't have to run this from fear. I
Mhm.
don't think you need to lie to your employees and then hope when you pass them in the grocery store, they will somehow say, oh, well, but good, because that person made a lot of money, so it's okay. They lied to me. Get grown up and real.
Yeah.
Like, no
Yeah.
one likes to be lied to or
Yeah.
deceived. And I just don't think that's a way we need to run our businesses or our lives. And I'm on a little bit of a mission about that. As you can tell, I have some energy about this
I
topic right now.
Denise, you have the most passionate energy that is just it is incredible. I wish we had another hour. I'm not kidding, because this has been one of the best podcasts I've done to date.
Oh, you're so
I
thoughtful.
just want to thank you so
Can I
much.
tell you a little about my book before we go?
Please, yes,
Would you
please
mind?
tell the audience how they also get in touch with you. Yes.
So the book is called The Seller's Journey,
Okay.
and it's written as a business fable. It's the story of a business owner 1 year after he sells his business. And he goes on a trip across Glacier National Park with all of the advisors who helped him sell his business, his banker, his lawyer, his wealth manager, and the buyer who bought his firm. And as they cross the glacier, they relate the physical obstacles they're facing to the emotional obstacles that he faced in letting go of his business. It's designed to help normalize this experience that owners go through. But the other part that happens in this book is you're able to see what it's like to work with advisors who deeply care about this owner and who are committed to doing a transaction in a way that also cares for the transition that the owner is undergoing, and advisors who are not caught up in the crazy fear cycle of deception and harm. And so it is based on a series of different transactions that I've participated in. I have to tell you, it was one of the most fun things that I've done in such a long time.
It sounds like it. I love how you approach working with business owners. I just feel such a connection to you, because I could not endorse or agree more on everything you just said. It's what Raincatcher is built upon. It's what I believe, because these are business owners that deserve the best. And I am so glad there are people like you out there spreading the word, helping these business owners, because we need you. And I can't appreciate, I can't thank you enough for being
Thank
a
you.
guest on my podcast today. This has been incredible. How do
Thank
they get
you.
a hold of you? If someone wants to learn more, how do they reach you?
Oh, yeah. So my website, super easy, deniselogan.com. The book is available there. We set up a code for listeners of your podcast so they can put in the word RAIN 10, RAIN 10, for a discount on the book and free shipping if they want it. If you're a listener, if you're a podcast listener, if you listen to books on audio, you can get it on audio on Audible or in Kindle. But if you get it from the website, I will also sign your copy.
Oh, thank you, Denise. We just thank you for being a part of this journey with us, and can't endorse enough what Denise has said today. Any business owners out there that are considering selling, please buy the seller's journey and use that discount code. And thanks for your time today, Denise.
You're welcome. And listeners, make sure you choose the kind of advisor like Marla and the folks at Raincatcher who are really committed to doing more than just getting you through the deal. You want someone who cares about you and sees what you're going through and can help walk this path with you. Thanks so much for having me, Marla.
Thank you, Denise.